How does one segue from OnlyFans and Johnny's vertical challenges to Afghanistan?
Well, it's just one lot of people getting fucked on camera for another, really, isn't it?
Bloop.
Jump right in.
There's also probably vertically challenged man in Afghanistan too.
Probably still.
Bro, if you lack imagination, there's many ways to bridge this.
Yeah. Very good.
Very good.
Very good. Very good.
Let's jump right in, man. The troops got withdrawn in what can only be described as a ridiculously hasty way, and the Taliban are back.
Baby.
They're back, baby. Yeah. So this is bleak. This is bleak in 150 million different ways.
Yeah.
First things first, thoughts with the Afghan people who, having already survived 20 years
100%.
of shit, are now entering a new era
Shout out my brother in the Billa, man. Love you.
of
Facts.
shit. Shout out all the Afghan expats
Facts.
across Europe and the world who have left, are leaving family behind to God knows
It's
what's
funny
coming.
how no one refers to them as expats, isn't it?
Yeah,
Well, they're immigrants, aren't they? This
refugees,
is
weren't
this is what Akala's point was, that white people are expats and everyone else is an immigrant, right?
I hate that.
Thoughts also with, you can have your views, and there's been a lot of shit Twitter takes from mainly lefties about soldiers who served in Afghanistan being agents of imperialism. I've not really got a lot of chuck with that. Thoughts also with a lot of scarred service people who joined the army or the navy or the RAF for various reasons, depending on their socioeconomic background, the opportunities available to them in life, who've come back, if they're fortunate enough to have come back from Afghanistan scarred by conflict, physically or mentally. My brother served in Afghanistan. He knew people who died out there. He knew people who took their own lives when they got back, such as the horror of war. And it's something that people in the West like to write about, like to play war games with, like to sensationalize and visualize. But really, it's very comfortable and very easy writing for magazines and newspapers about the horrors of war without ever having to experience it when you've got people of lower socioeconomic class who do your fighting for you.
Don't know.
Joe Biden came out with a speech
Yeah.
announcing the withdrawal, and the first thing he said at the beginning of the speech was that it was never America's intention to do a nation-building exercise in Afghanistan. It's an abhorrent statement. Again, for 100 different reasons. I've been reading a book called Directorate S, I think, which is all about the CIA's campaign of influence in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Everyone who knows, or who's listened to this, knows that I recommend frequently people read Devil's Chessboard, which is another book about the history of the CIA from Dulles through to the modern era and their influence as a shadow government in the US. But really what the CIA did in laying the groundwork post 9/11 for war in Afghanistan is abhorrent. And the idea that Afghanistan was invaded en masse when the US were effectively trying to capture what was an enemy combatant group of the Afghan government or the Afghan people at the time, based across the Pakistani border, being supported by Pakistani intelligence, it never made any sense to start with. They purportedly went to Afghanistan to find Al-Qaeda, who were you can make the case that they were being harbored by the Taliban government. The Taliban is quite literally an influential body created by the Pakistani security services, so that the Pashtun community of Afghanistan would be pro-Pakistani in their sympathies, politically speaking. Yeah. So an operation is the exact same thing as having funded the Mujahideen following the Soviet conflict in the 90s. These are American imperialist ventures that eventually bit the hand that fed them. And for the Americans, for the imperialists to walk out 20 years later saying that it was never our intention to build this nation up, it's totally wrong, totally abhorrent. It was explicitly their intention. They could have taken Al-Qaeda out in the east of Afghanistan without invading the rest of the country. They put political actors in, from Hamid Karzai to various following presidents, that served with the intention of propagating American interests, while they effectively abandoned the campaign in Afghanistan to go and invade Iraq because there were more usable assets there than there were in Afghanistan. Like I said, for America to later say that their intention was never to support or build an Afghan nation basically speaks to the vacuous nature of modern Western neo-imperialism, that it feels entitled to walk through a country, bomb it to shit, and then leave without taking any responsibility for what it leaves behind.
100%.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know how much there is to say beyond it's fucking awful. Nobody wins. Nobody's won here. America hasn't secured Afghanistan in its bizarre neo-imperialist
People have
vision.
won,
Afghanistan
that?
is not in a
So
safer
people have
place.
won. He said no one's won. Bear man have won.
Okay,
Bear
yeah, all
man
right,
have
fine.
won.
Halliburton have won, and the defense contractors have won, etc., etc. But the vast majority of people have lost. It's not a safer place than it was 20 years ago. The Taliban are back, and they're back in a more aggressive form.
I have no idea what just happened.
That
Carry
was
on.
kind of mad chat.
Yeah.
The Taliban are back, and they're back in a more aggressive form. Rather than having a weakened Al Qaeda as the kind of operative force of a Taliban government, there's now a new form of ISIS that have taken over, who are even more aggressive and are responsible for these bombings that we've seen at Kabul airport. The political situation is no clearer. The security situation is no clearer, and the West is no safer. America is no safer. Britain is no safer for having abandoned its responsibilities in Afghanistan, because the reason they went in last time, that it was allegedly a breeding ground for terror, which was tenuous at best.
Do you think it's
it's
less
now
of a
likely
breeding
to
ground?
become a breeding ground for terror again?
Do you think it's less of a breeding ground?
Now?
Yeah.
No, not for the pullout, not for the pullout, because for a very minimal,
Fine. Do you think it's less
NATO,
than- Do you
I'll
think
tell you
it's
why.
less of a So they went into Afghanistan because the argument was it's a breeding ground for terror that's ultimately going to come and attack us. Do you believe that today that breeding ground is less or the same as it was when they went in 2001?
It's at best the same. At best the same. Give it 2 months, because the Taliban are now back in control.
I don't agree, actually.
Absolutely not. It's clearly not true, right?
I don't agree
Please.
because 20 years ago, we didn't have an influx of technology that could actually, we've got members of the Taliban now who are using smartphones to connect with each other.
They had satellite phones.
But we did not have that 20 years ago.
They did. They had satellite phones.
They did not have that 20 years ago.
They did.
But Karen,
Not in the same way. They didn't use social media in the same way.
I agree on that. The propaganda game was weaker.
It is so much more different and more dangerous now because they're able to actually operate, underground. They were able to operate underground back then, but the technology that they've got now is so far advanced that it's actually more dangerous,
So
in my opinion.
That's what I said.
I
I
think
said it's
the
at least
the
more
technology
dangerous.
point is interesting.
They're
Going
using
back
it
to your
so much
point
more
about
differently.
how poorly the evacuation was handled.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Cool. The technology ties into that. The Taliban now has access to weaponry that was essentially abandoned by
Definitely.
allied forces.
They've got $8 billion worth of gear that they just picked up.
Fine. So the technology point we can take on board. But is the country less of a breeding ground for terror? The answer can only be yes. Right?
Why?
Of course, the Taliban have spent 20 years living in a fucking, I don't know what the right word for it is, but in a hole, basically, being bombed and depleted or whatever for the last 20 years. So there's no way we can argue that the Taliban today is stronger than it was when the US entered.
They have more of an axe to grind now.
It's also impossible to argue that ISIS-K, this new terrorist organization, is of any real consequence. It's not. Every analyst says it's not.
They just killed 60 Afghan civilians
Yeah,
at the
anyone
airport.
could send a guy with a fucking suicide belt, a vest on to some. But as a body, they are. You can read any analysis. You can listen to anyone speaking on this. They all concur. Like they spent the last 2 years murking off these ISIS-K. They're a sworn enemy of the Taliban. They're a sworn enemy of the allied forces. Everyone's been murking them, right? You have the Afghan Secret Service who were compiling intelligence, passing it on to the Americans who just droned the shit out of it, right? And what we've learned is, and going back to what you were saying about the Afghan people who haven't had a good time, what we've learned is that the US and the drone strikes was all one big fuckery. So we were told that drone strikes were targeted killings. We specifically target the person we're looking for and we murk that guy, right?
They lied.
What we've learned in the last few weeks is that was all crap, right? At the moment, or they had historically authorization to do these drone strikes and double tap drone strikes when they didn't require authorization, when there was like less than 7 civilians that would get injured, right? That means you didn't have to run it up through the pole to get authorization to do this. If there were 6 kids, if you're trying to get that target, right? That's catch. If there's 7 or 8 kids, then we'd have to kind of call up and see if we can do it. Afghanistan was the most droned country in the world, right? So, yes, I think personally, when you look at the last 20 years, it's all about perspective, right? It's all about perspective. I read something that said like in 2004, the Taliban, after getting murked off by the US in the initial invasion, basically, which is the only part of this whole exercise, I guess the US did pretty well. The Taliban offered to destroy all their weapons, hand in their weapons, and participate in the kind of peace process, right? which was ultimately rejected by the Bush administration, which historically now is a bad decision, right? But if that was the case, then these Taliban man that we're all switching out about right now would just be any other international actor where we have a marriage of convenience. There'd be no difference to the Saudis. There'd be no different to what's going on in Pakistan. There'd be no different to all of these other organizations. And now that they've come in and regained control, that's what we're going to see. There's no way that you think now that the US or the UK or the G7 are not going to be working with these Taliban men, right? So for me, it's all about perspective. The US, the UK is rushing to leave. China and Russia, not a single person has been evacuated. China's just prepared 8,000 peacekeepers to come into the country, right?
Of course, it's an influence
So
game.
it's a perspective thing, right?
Yeah.
So perspective in terms of who won, defense contractors and a massive industry in the US made a lot of money. But now China's waiting to include these fuckers into the Belt and Roads Initiative, and this is going to be a big boon for Afghanistan. This is going to be China coming in and building infrastructure like there's no tomorrow, and essentially taking minerals from underground and
Trillions
shipping them
of
back
lithium,
to,
isn't it?
to
They're sitting on.
lithium, and there's all types of shit,
Yeah.
and shipping that back to that Belt and Road Initiative. Afghanistan was, if you look at the map of how they wanted to do this Belt and Roads through the Middle East into Africa and Afghanistan was the only missing piece.
It's the old
because,
Silk Road, right?
Sorry?
The old
Silk
Road.
Road,
Peter
exactly. The
Frankenheimer's
Belt and Road
book,
Initiative
everyone
is
should
what they
read
call
the
it.
Silk
Yeah.
Road.
So realistically, we sat here in London reading newspapers and reading CNN or whatever, and it sounds like, oh yeah, all of our interests are murked off. But it's perspective. If you're sat in Afghanistan, you're happy for these men to leave because they just spent 20 years bombing the shit out of you.
Exactly.
You've had these military contractors committing all types of atrocities in the country that we've seen, documented. No one gives a fuck about here in the West. Then you've got the Chinese there, like, don't worry about these guys. We're waiting to offer you $25 billion worth of loans straight off the bat or whatever. So, yeah, we sat here and we think, Afghanistan, what a terrible job. But I think in Afghanistan, people are, let's say, not as sad as the media paints as us.
Jesus Christ. I don't know how you can make a claim like that when there's videos of hundreds, if not thousands of people desperate and clinging onto planes to escape at Kabul airport. Thousands and thousands of more trying to escape to the Pakistani border.
Sure.
The wider point that I want to make, and that I was trying to make, was that this basically calls into question the entire premise of liberal intervention. We went into Afghanistan with the explicit aim of making it less dangerous from the perspective of creating a democratic society. And we spent 20 years bombing civilians. We killed 60,000 innocent people so that girls could go to school and there would be democratic elections, etc. And as the going got tough and as people thought that it was maybe starting to get a little bit expensive, we've totally given up that progress. And we've now sold all these women and girls. We've sold all these women and girls back into the arms of what is effectively going to be an oppressive regime. We've left our own allies, our soldiers, translators, NGO workers. We've left these people without papers to get themselves to refuge. What was the point of bombing all these civilians and dominating country for 20 years if we're just going to give up eventually?
Amen.
Can I ask you, so you agree with Tony Blair then? That's what his position is.
Yeah,
exactly
he
what you said. We should
hasn't come
leave
out and
2,000,
spoken about it,
3,000 troops there forever. Do you agree with that?
I don't necessarily think you need to leave them forever if you do the job properly.
What's doing the job properly? They
job-
tried to do the job properly. They pumped $2-3 trillion into it. What? Look, if your argument is that the exercise of nation building we found to be false, cool. We all agree with that. That's all bullshit. You can't go into another country, a country you really don't understand, and try to export some form of culture that you have in your country. Cool. We're all on the same page on that. But what's your argument? Your argument is they should still be there now.
The argument is
till
that the objective was supposedly to eradicate the Taliban. That isn't a particularly difficult objective. It's hard to find them, but the CIA and MI6 are capable enough of finding them. But they had Bin Laden in Tora Bora rather. They had these people found, so we found them, and we can do that job. If the objective was to get rid of Al Qaeda and Taliban, that's very easily done. We didn't follow through on that because it was more profitable, it was more useful to have Afghanistan in a state of flux. It justified private contractors staying in there. It's a good tax earner. Private interest made a lot of money out of it. This was never.
But what's your point? What's your point about
the point was that we should keep
about leaving? I mean, should we leave or should we have not left?
We should have kept a minimal force to maintain security.
So it's Tony Blair's bar. That's exactly what Tony Blair's
And
arguing.
you don't agree with that?
No, I'm not disagreeing. I'm trying to clarify his position because you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, my view
right?
is that we shouldn't have thrown away 20 years of work.
So you think we should still stay?
Yes.
So your argument isn't one that we should leave in a more properly planned manner, like that Biden rushed it by giving us 2
I think he
weeks
did
or
rush it.
whatever.
We should set up to leave when we can leave. At the moment, it's not appropriate to leave.
But that's indefinite then, right?
But it's
That's
not indefinite, not
effectively
if you do the job
indefinite.
properly.
You're arguing that until we're able to export this idea of democracy that they've been trying to do for 20 years, we should stay.
Democracy,
Tony
whatever it
Blair
is.
said that with a troop of 2,500 Americans, 1,000 Brits, and whatever else, some condensed smaller force, that we haven't seen any deaths on our side, and we could carry on making the inroads to the Afghanistan of the future that we want to see. That's what you're parroting,
having
basically.
created instability, it's our job to maintain it, and we can't just surrender security because it's not convenient for us.
So I actually remember the very day when the war was announced. I think I was like 10 years old at primary school, and Tony Blair was Prime Minister, and I wrote to him. I was like, can you come to my school? I was a staunch Labour. I mean, my parents were staunch Labour supporters back then. But, you know, we know now, even 5-10 years after, that the reason why we went to Afghanistan was based on lies. And to deep that, even now, at 28 now that we're coming out of it, looking at the destruction that we have caused from the West, you know, I'm not surprised if it is now a worse, more like a breeding ground for terror. We've caused that.
There's no terror left.
We have literally gone into a
how you can argue
country under false pretenses.
That's all Iraq. That's not Afghanistan.
It
right?
doesn't matter.
Iraq was false pretenses. Iraq was when they said we had
Both.
weapons of mass destruction.
Both.
and all that.
Afghanistan was false pretenses as well.
Both.
What was the false
Because
pretense? They said that's where Osama bin Laden is.
the issue with us going into those countries is no different from colonialism and going and thinking that we can
Agreed.
fix a problem.
Agreed.
We don't know
Agreed.
anything about them. So
Agreed.
why do we feel, and this is what I hate about us, and I say us because I'm not part of this, and I hate the fact that this country in the West seems to think that we're better than everyone else, and we need to go into these countries and fix up their political landscape and do this. And all we've done is broken up families. We have caused deaths, unnecessary violence, and then decided, oh, we're done now. I'll just fuck off.
Yeah.
And now all these women and children who are out without families, as you said, people are literally clinging onto planes to try and escape from the violence and are dying.
The flip side of what you're saying is things were better.
But also, let me finish. You know, all these people now are going to obviously, you know, seek asylum in our country.
Sure.
But now we are a hostile environment. So this is another issue that we're having to face.
Hostile environment
Pretty-
to-
A hostile environment to
Oh,
immigrants
yeah.
coming over.
Oh,
And
Pretty
now,
Patel ain't gonna have that
exactly.
shit either,
She ain't
let's
going to
be
have all
honest.
these people from Afghanistan coming to our country.
What
So
do you
where
think-
do we go from here? We've gone into a country where we've caused havoc.
Yeah.
And now we're not going to allow them asylum to the country.
Don't know.
I can't. That doesn't fix with me.
What do you think about all the people who have said that Biden's worse than Trump right now?
I wouldn't go that far, to be honest. I really wouldn't.
I would. I'd say he's
I
worse.
find that as a wild
It
hot
almost
take.
doesn't matter though.
I'd say it's worse.
It's like a distraction. In my
I
eyes.
don't
You think it's
think
worse?
that's true.
What do you reckon?
I think it's a
worse.
distraction.
But what do you
I
think?
don't care. Yeah, they're the same shit. I prefer Trump.
I'd say he's worse in this context because Biden's excuse.
Only because with Trump, there's no bullshit. It's to the face.
Yeah.
Trump would have come out and said, I don't care about these
I agree.
Afghans. I'm not looking to waste $1 trillion a year. Yalla, bye.
I get what you're saying.
Whereas Biden's coming up with the fluff, oh, we've achieved our objective, this is this, and we're
I
leaving
get
that
what you're
behind.
saying.
There's none of that facade.
I
with
think
Trump.
He's trying to
Biden-
be diplomatic about it.
Yeah, I think Biden's basically been pretty straightforward, but it's just nicer.
Look, the thing.
He's older.
The reason,
Diplomatic.
He is.
the
They're the
reason,
same age, I think.
the reason I think Biden's worse than Trump
Wow.
is that
Yeah.
Oh no, but
They're
about
Biden,
the same age.
Biden
Yeah.
is literally just
he's fucking senile. Bless
Yeah,
him. He's got
exactly.
shit for brains. The reason I think Biden's worse than Trump on this one is because there have been plenty of leaked papers affected that the US troop withdrawal was a negotiating position to get the pro-Western Afghan government to agree to a limited force to remain. Now, they lost the election, they couldn't follow through with that, but Biden's pussy excuse for pulling out of Afghanistan was that my hands were tied by Trump's policy of withdrawal.
I remember when he
It's a
said
great
that.
excuse.
It's a shit excuse because the guy came in and wrote like 6 executive orders in his first day. You are the commander in chief. If you tell the army to stay, they stay.
Yeah.
Biden's a pusshole and they've bottled this, and I don't think people will ever forget it.
But he
No,
hasn't
no.
bottled it. This was his opinion. He doesn't like the war. He wants to leave.
He doesn't give a shit. He doesn't even know where Afghanistan is.
Haram. Bad take. That's what it is.
Johnny,